All right, good morning and thank you for joining us today. My name is Matthew Wright. I am a media specialist at Alberta Agriculture and Forestry and will be the moderator for today's webinar titled Sustainable Strategy Execution. This is the third and final webinar in the Sustainable Strategic Planning webinar series, presented by Brett Wills, President of Green Enterprise Movement. Now, a few things about Brett. He brings over 15 years of experience in sustainable business management, and as a former plant manager, has firsthand experience developing and executing strategies to drive organizational performance. As president of the Green Enterprise Movement and director of sustainability for High Performance Solutions, Brett now spends a majority of his time helping organizations accelerate their triple bottom line performance. He has worked with hundreds of organizations across a broad sector of industries, including manufacturing, government, healthcare, retail, and hospitality. Over the past 6 years, Brett has spent a considerable amount of time working with food processors across Canada to enhance their overall performance. He lives in Toronto and is the author of Green Intentions, Creating a Green Value Stream to Compete and Win, published in 2009, and author of Purposely Profitable, Embedding Sustainability into the DNA of Food Processing and Other Businesses, which will be published in early 2016. Brett holds a BA in Economics from Wilfrid Laurier University and has completed postgraduate studies at Dalhousie University. Now, a few notes before I hand things over to Brett. If you have any technical issues with WebEx, send me a chat message and I will try to sort it out. The chat box is located from the drop-down menu at the top middle of your screen, and send the message to me, the host. Also, we encourage participant interaction. So if you have a question, again, open your chat box, type in your question, and send it to me. At the end of the presentation, during our Q&A session, I will pose the questions to Brett so that all the participants can hear. Now, we are anticipating about 45 minutes for this webinar, and I will now turn it over to Brett.
Great, thanks, Matt. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to, as Matt said, the final webinar in the webinar series on sustainable strategic planning. The focus for today's webinar is really on strategy execution, but we are quickly going to review our previous webinar, Webinar 2, on strategy development. For those folks who were unable to join us for the last one or view it online, I'll just give you a quick view of what was covered in the last webinar. And for those folks who were able to join us last time, it'll just be a very quick refresher. So we're going to get into, after that, the elements of successful strategy execution, and that will be followed up by a few supporting tools and resources that will help support execution of your strategy. As Matt said, we'll have some time for Q&A at the end of that. And then we'll take a few minutes at the end of today's webinar to discuss possible next steps for folks looking to move forward with sustainable strategy development execution. And then we'll get things wrapped up by 1 o'clock or 11 o'clock there. So just for the folks who aren't able to attend the last webinar, or a refresher for the folks who were, last webinar was really focused on strategy development. So how do we develop a strategy that is sustainable over the long term? And what we really started out with and what we saw was that what we need to do here is we need to shift the paradigm when it comes to strategic planning. Historically, there have been many successful dynamic models for developing a strategic plan for an organization. However, when those models were developed, sustainability wasn't really a focus, or wasn't at the forefront for a lot of organizations. So what ended up happening was there was the situation where organizations would have some sort of business plan, business strategy developed, and they would come across this thing called sustainability. And seeing the business value in it, the logical next step was to begin to develop a sustainability strategy for their organization. And therein lied the problem with traditional approaches to strategic planning. What we end up with is we end up with a business strategy and a sustainability strategy, two siloed strategies that are managed by different levels of the organization. So the model that was presented in the last webinar brings together traditional approaches to strategic planning, but more importantly, it brings together a business strategy with a sustainability strategy to develop a long-term strategy that is sustainable. And what we saw was that, traditionally and typically organizations will have some sort of business strategy in place, whether it's formalized or not, whether it's effective or not. It varies depending on the organization, but typically organizations will have some sort of business strategy in place. The problem is that the business strategy does not integrate or incorporate all dimensions of sustainability, and it also is not clearly focused and aligned to a longer-term vision for the organization, which will ultimately help organizations fulfill a higher level purpose beyond profit maximization. So what we looked at was sort of the before and after of the model or the framework that was presented. So on the left-hand side of your slide here, you see what a traditional misaligned, non-integrated business strategy looks like. So sure, there are certain components of a good strategy in place. There's key focus areas. There's a longer-term vision for the organization. There's typically some aspects of sustainability, but not all aspects, all three dimensions, social, environmental, economic, integrated into that strategy. So what you end up having is a misaligned strategy where everything is not aligned and focused and pointed in the right direction for the long term. There isn't a higher level purpose that's driving the existence of an organization, a higher level purpose beyond profit maximization, that is. And there's certainly aspects of sustainability that are missing from the strategy. The diagram on your left is sort of a generic diagram where you can see there is the aspect of environmental sustainability included in this strategy, but again, it's not pointed or aligned and focused in the right direction. But there's also pieces, the social pieces of sustainability missing from that, where the after situation, when we look at the model that was presented, shows an integrated strategy that is completely aligned and focused on a longer-term vision of the organization that will ultimately fulfill a greater purpose. So the real focus for the second webinar, the last webinar, was how do we then take this framework or this model that looks good in theory and put it into practical application? And that's where we get to below the line there, the bottom part of the screen, where we looked at a specific process for developing a strategy that is sustainable, one that integrates all dimensions of sustainability, is completely aligned and focused in the right direction. And we went through each one of those steps. What's our purpose beyond profit maximization for the organization's existence? And what is the future desired state of the vision that will help us to ultimately fulfill that purpose? And then we spent a fair amount of time looking at what the strategic pillars that were required in order to achieve that vision. And these strategic pillars, as we saw, were the key focus areas. These were the elements that were critical to the organization's success that would allow them to achieve their vision and fulfill their purpose. And what we saw was when we're developing a strategy that's sustainable, we don't just have three strategic pillars of social, environmental, and economic. We have a set of strategic pillars where we first go through and say, hey, what are the key critical components to our success? Is it customers? Is it suppliers? Is it other stakeholders? Is it our people? Is it innovation? What are those elements that are critical to the success of our organization? Once we've established those strategic pillars, we then need to go back through and make sure that we have all aspects of sustainability. So the social aspect, the environmental aspect, the economic aspects integrated into those pillars. And once we have set those pillars, we then look at setting our financial objectives, which later on will help us to set our goals. Once our financial objectives are set, particularly revenue, gross margin, and overhead, we can then begin to develop a set of what are called KPIs, or key performance indicators, that will measure the progress towards achieving each of the strategic pillars. So for those of folks who attended the last webinar, you will have seen that for each of the strategic pillars, there is an aspirational statement that replaces the traditional mission statement of how we're going to achieve our vision and fulfill our purpose. And for each one of these pillars, we then develop a set of key performance indicators that will measure whether or not we're moving in the right direction. With those KPIs in place, it enables us to set clear, measurable goals. And with the goals put in place, we then put the programs and initiatives in place in order to achieve those goals. So there are really 7 steps to developing a strategy that is sustainable. And the 8th step, which is tactical execution, is what we're really going to focus on today. So, moving right into that, the rest of this webinar will be focused on, how do we execute that strategy that we have developed? And, strategy execution is absolutely much more difficult, much more challenging than developing the strategy itself. And this isn't just coming from myself or, from other folks. According to a recent Harvard Business Review article, strategy execution topped the list of the most pressing and difficult challenges that executives face today. And it even topped things such as innovation and driving top-line growth. Strategy execution was the #1 challenge facing organizations today. And, begs the question, why is that? Why is strategy execution so challenging and so difficult? Even for the most sophisticated of organizations and the sophisticated and educated executives, why is it still so challenging? Well, there's a number of reasons, and there's a number of thoughts on why this is. Some of the reasons, some of the main reasons anyway, are there is no formula, there's no methodology, there's no specific model or process for exactly how you execute a strategy. Strategy execution tends to lean more on softer skills like leadership and discipline and those types of things. Having said that, there are key characteristics, key elements to successful strategy execution. And these have come from leading organizations that are ultra successful, not only as an organization, but in executing the strategies that they have developed. It's one thing to develop a strategy, but if you can't execute, it's another. And there's been a number of sort of elements that have identified what sets the good companies apart from the great companies when it comes to strategy execution. The main ones you're seeing on your screen right now, it's, how are we communicating the strategic plan? How are we building accountability for the goals and KPIs that were set out in that strategic plan? How are we actually managing on a day-to-day basis this strategy execution? And of course, how do we make sure that we have the right people in the right spots on the bus and we have the right team in order to be able to execute the strategy? And how do we lock in the gains that we're realizing from executing the strategy and improving our performance? So let's take a look at each one of these in turn and give you a better idea of what each element is talking about. So the first element that we're going to look at is how we effectively communicate the strategic plan. Now, you may be looking at this and saying, well, that sounds very simple and basic. Of course, we need to communicate the strategic plan. The rub here is, or the challenge here is that organizations are not effective in how they actually communicate the strategic plan. To simply say that, this is our purpose, this is our vision, these are our strategic pillars, and these are our KPIs, is not nearly enough to make sure that strategic plan is communicated properly. And by communicating the strategic plan, what we're really trying to do is we're really trying to give people a very clear picture of what the organization is going to look like in the future if we follow through with the strategic plan. So the first thing that we really need to communicate and get across is the purpose and the vision. So we need to define, first of all, what a purpose is, that it's the reason that we open our doors every day, that our purpose goes beyond profit maximization. There's a reason that this business exists beyond making money. Whether it's to feed people better, whether it's to nourish people, whether it's to solve a certain problem or a certain social issue, there's a reason that we exist beyond just maximizing profit. And, what is a vision? Well, a vision is a future state of what the organization is going to look like. So once people understand what a purpose and a vision is, and what the purpose and vision is for your specific organization, you then need to paint a clear picture of what that organization is going to look like when it's achieved. So for example, we talked about this a little bit in the past webinar. If we have a vision to be the most trusted provider of products X, Y, and Z to the food service industry in Alberta, well, what does that look like? What does that mean to be the most trusted provider? Well, maybe that means to have the best quality, to have the best consistency, to have fair pricing, to have on-time delivery. All of these things will then contribute to being the most trusted provider, for example, right? So once people understand what this vision means or what the organization is trying to achieve, it makes it a lot easier to sort of wrap their heads around and relate to what is actually meant by the purpose and the vision, right? So beyond that, people need to ensure that by achieving the vision, it's going to help to fulfill that purpose. And a big piece of effectively communicating this is not just to sit in a town hall somewhere or a boardroom somewhere or on a webinar and say, this is our vision, our purpose, and this is what the future looks like, but to actually sit down and chat with every single employee in your organization and chat with them about how they contribute to the vision and fulfilling the purpose. In the example that we just talked about, how do they contribute to being the most trusted provider? How do they contribute to quality? How do they contribute to pricing? How do they contribute to on-time delivery, right? Someone who is on the front line may not understand when they're putting ingredients in a kettle that they actually have a big role in contributing to being the most trusted provider. If they don't put in the right amount of ingredients for the right amount of time, so on and so forth, the quality is not going to be there. And if the quality is not there, maybe we need to remake a batch. And if we have to remake a batch, maybe we're late on a delivery. So every single activity that happens within an organization contributes to fulfilling this greater vision and purpose. And employees need to understand how what may seem like mundane, tedious daily activities don't really matter, actually contribute and have a lot of relevance in achieving the greater vision. Yeah, we made sort of an analogy last webinar that it's like a bank account, right? So every time that you do something right and you put the right ingredients in and for the right amount of time and you produce good quality products, it's like making a small deposit in that bank account and building that trust account with your customer. Whereas every time, you're not following standard operating procedures or GMPs and it affects quality, it affects delivery, it's like making a little withdrawal from that bank account. And like we all know, our bank accounts can sustain a withdrawal here and there, but if we have more withdrawals than we have deposits, we're not going to be able to build up a balance in that bank account. And what will end up happening from an organizational perspective is both figuratively and literally is that the organization will go bankrupt, right? So, organizations need to make sure that not only they have a clear purpose and a clear vision, but employees understand what that means, what the organization is going to look like, and how they can contribute to that. And another key thing here is to create an emotional attachment, and that's where the purpose comes in, right? If employees understand that there's a greater purpose beyond profit maximization for why the organization they work for exists, they're going to have a stronger emotional attachment. And what ends up happening is people start to come into work and they start to get passionate about what they do. They start to get, have a vested interest in what they do, and they want to make the organization successful. So communicating the purpose and the vision is a little bit more than, putting a purpose and a vision up on a wall or in a poster on a slide deck somewhere. It's much more interactive than that. Once you have communicated the purpose and the vision, you then need to communicate what the strategic pillars are. So, once employees understand where this strategy is taking them and taking the organization, they need to understand how they're going to get there. And that's where these strategic pillars come in, right? So the strategic pillars is the how, right? So these are the elements that are critical to success. And each employee needs to understand what exactly each of these elements are and how they integrate all aspects of sustainability. Beyond that, they need to understand how this aligns towards achieving the vision and fulfilling the purpose. And how we do this is simply by showing them the model and showing them that by focusing on these key areas and by fulfilling the aspirations for each of these three key areas, it will help to achieve that vision, let's say the most trusted partner, right? So, if we want to have good quality, then maybe one of our strategic pillars is operational excellence. So in order to have great quality, great on-time delivery, we need to have operational excellence. We need to have good quality programs in place, productivity programs, continuous improvement, so on and so forth. And employees will see how focusing on these pillars or these elements that are critical to success will ultimately achieve the vision and fulfill the purpose. Again, like we did with the purpose and particularly the vision, we need to paint a clear picture of what the company will look like if the aspirations for each of those strategic pillars are achieved. So let's say, for example, an organization may have an operational excellence pillar that says that things will be completed efficiently and effectively, but maybe in an environmentally sustainable manner. Well, what does that exactly mean? What does an environmentally sustainable manner mean? Well, maybe that means that we will use X amount of kilowatt hours per kilogram of product produced, or we will produce X amount of kilograms of waste per product produced. Employees need to have a concrete picture, a clear picture of what each of these aspirations are really talking about and what each one of these aspirations will actually look like if achieved, very similar to what the organization will look like when the vision is achieved. And, again, it's really important that you link these to these strategic pillars to the vision. So again, this involves sitting down with employees and taking the time to chat with them. And, it may seem like, as I was saying, a very basic concept thing. But what I find, a lot of my colleagues find, and I think that a lot of folks on here today will see, is that the organizations that are very successful today, they have the basics down pat. They're extremely good at doing things like communicating the strategic plan and how each individual contributes towards that. So, while it may seem like a very basic concept that we sort of glance over, if we don't take the time to get this right, man, does it become challenging down the road. So, moving on here, once the strategic pillars, purpose and vision are communicated, we then need to get down to the nitty-gritty stuff, right? So the KPIs and the goals. So, first of all, employees need to understand what a KPI is. What we saw in the last webinar is that there's a big misunderstanding out there in terms of, what a KPI is. Is it an actual initiative, or is it a measure of performance, right? And as what we saw is, key performance indicators, KPIs, are not an initiative per se in itself, but it's the indicator that measures the performance of initiatives that you will eventually put in place. So, you need to explain how there's a set of KPIs that were set up to measure the progress under each of those strategic pillars. In other words, are we getting closer or further away from achieving those aspirational statements for each of the strategic pillars? Because if we're getting closer to achieving those aspirational statements for our strategic pillars, we are getting closer to achieving our vision, which brings us closer to fulfilling our ultimate purpose for why the organization exists. We also need to understand, make sure employees understand that the difference between a key performance indicator and a lower level metric. So as what we saw in the last webinar in strategy development was that there's a distinct difference between a KPI and a metric. KPIs are just that. They're key performance indicators, whereas metrics are lower level indicators that will contribute to the higher level KPIs. And the other thing is, before you get into the goals, you have to explain how KPIs really are the foundation for setting goals. So, first we need to measure our performance, and then we need to set goals against that performance. So if we're going to set a measure, let's say, kilograms of product produced per labor hour or something, for example, if that's a KPI for us, we then can set a goal for that. But without having a KPI in place, it becomes very difficult to set a meaningful goal that is aligned to the higher level vision for the organization. So explaining how KPIs are the foundation for setting goals. And then, I think it's really important that employees understand how goals were set, that this isn't just something that was pulled out of the air to make life challenging for them, but that goals were set using a strategic approach. So we looked at 3 different ways of setting goals in the last webinar, which were internal benchmarking. How are we doing internally within different divisions of our organization or different departments of our organization, and maybe taking the top performing divisions or departments and using that as the benchmark. We can also look at external benchmarking, where we benchmark ourselves to world-class performers, both in our industry and outside of our industry. Or did we use sort of an opportunity-based benchmarking, where we say, hey, if we want to set a goal, let's say for environmental performance or reducing our carbon footprint, let's say, then what are the opportunities that are available to us right now in order to achieve the reduce our carbon footprint, for example. So that's based on, the opportunities that we see that are available. So, a lot of time employees, think that goals are just pulled out of the air. But if employees see that there was a strategic path or process that was used to set these goals, getting their buy-in becomes a lot easier. And, the final sort of point here, and I think that this is a really important one that we shouldn't glance over, is that employees need to understand that which goals apply to them, that all the goals for the organization do not necessarily apply to them, that they have specific goals that they must focus on, with the broader understanding that their performance will affect other goals. They certainly need to understand that interrelation there, but employees really need to understand which goals apply to them, and what they need to do in order to achieve those goals. So it's really, again, I can't stress enough how important it is to, for leaders of an organization, senior executives in an organization, really to sit down with every single employee and make sure they understand not only where the organization is going, why they exist, the vision and the purpose, but the critical areas that they need to focus on, the organization needs to focus on to be successful. How are they measuring that performance? What are the goals, and what goals apply to them, and how do they contribute to this overall picture? Without that in place, essentially, employees are just coming in every day, and they don't see how they connect to the bigger picture. Therefore, they may not be as vested, as engaged, as passionate about what they're doing. But if they see how they contribute to the bigger picture, man, that's when the real magic starts to happen. And I've seen this over and over again. I'm sure you folks have seen this over and over again. When you look at the organizations that are super successful, they do this extremely well. And every single employee inside of those organizations, really understands, how they contribute to the bigger picture. So, with that out of the way, and having communicated the strategy and making sure that every employee understands their role in bringing that strategy to life, the next critical element to successfully executing a strategy is building accountability with each and every single one of those employees to the strategic plan. And what you'll see is, again, the organizations that are successful in strategy execution, they have done a fantastic job in building accountability. Again, there's no scientific formula for how you build accountability, but there are some things that you can really leverage from successful organizations to begin building accountability for your strategic plan within your organization. The first thing that you need is a mechanism for building accountability. And that's where the KPIs and the goals come in. They are the mechanism for building accountability. When you set clear ways to measure performance, and you set clear performance expectation, that being the goals, right? People understand the target that they're shooting at, right? If you say to someone, you give them a bow and arrow and tell them to shoot, a lot of the times their first question is going to be, shoot at what? I don't know what to shoot at. But as soon as you give them a clear target, it's amazing what happens. They have a purpose for why they're shooting. They know what they're shooting at. They know what they need to figure out in order to hit the bullseye there. So, it's not enough to say we need to improve on-time delivery. We need to improve quality. That's not enough. If you say improve to one person, maybe that means improve by 1%. If you say, improve to another person, maybe that means improve by 0.5%. Everybody has a different definition of what improve is. So The critical thing for building accountability is having clear goals and KPIs in place, because if you say to someone improve and you're expecting a 10% improvement, but you don't communicate that and you don't have a goal in place for that, and they only produce 5% improvement, how can you hold them accountable? It's virtually impossible to hold them accountable because you don't have anything to hold them accountable to. So, with the clear, by following the process for developing a strategy that is stable that we looked at in the last webinar, there's clear KPIs and clear goals in place, and communicating those goals as we did in the last slides there, as we talked about that. We then have to assign clear ownership for each one of those goals. And then those goals then become the level of performance that is expected from those employees, right? Once we've done that, what we can then do is we can build those goals and those performance expectations into our performance management systems. Now, some organizations will have more sophisticated performance management systems than others, but at the end of the day, it's, when you come into an organization, when you sit down, with your manager, these is what's expected of you. So, with clear goals in place, you can build that into those performance management systems or performance expectations. And of course, the big trick here, the big piece here, is that you could have all of this set up, clear goals, clear performance expectations that are built into a performance management system, but if there's no reward or repercussion when employees achieve or fail to achieve these expectations or these goals, then that's where the accountability breaks down. So this isn't about pointing fingers or penalizing folks. It's about saying, these are the goals that we put in place. Can you commit to achieving these goals? And I'm going to hold you accountable to this. And, it's really important that we don't hold people accountable once a year in their performance review or twice a year in their performance review, but we hold them accountable on a daily basis, right? So this sort of sense or notion of live live accountability. So, doing regular performance reviews, maybe on a weekly or monthly basis, as opposed to, doing a couple of times a year. And by, doing this on a regular basis, it'll reinforce that, these are the expectations, this is what is expected of you, and you're going to be held accountable to this. And again, there's no secret to this. It's just a matter of communicating it and doing it and being disciplined to holding people accountable. You can't let them get away with it one month and not let them get away with it the next month, right? So we need to be disciplined in how we approach that. So again, accountability to the strategic plan is super critical, because we could have the best strategic plan in place, communicated it elegantly, but if we're not going to hold people accountable to that, it's not going to go anywhere. Another element is of successful strategy execution is, how do we actually manage this on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, right? So, it's one thing to sit down and, develop a strategy, at our annual strategy meeting or something like that. It's another thing to, manage this on a daily basis. So in order to effectively manage strategy execution on a day-to-day basis, we need to, first of all, have a reporting mechanism. So we know what our strategy is. We know where we want to go. How are we doing against that? And that could be as simple as everybody getting into a room and saying and reporting out on their piece of the strategy. So if I'm responsible for the goal for environmental performance, or I'm responsible for the quality goal, or whatever the goal may be that I'm responsible for, I'm the one that is responsible for reporting that out and providing an update of where things are. Could be something as simple as that. What I've seen from other organizations, and some of you folks online today may have seen this as well, is implementing visual boards as a means of your reporting mechanism. So in a boardroom somewhere or a meeting room somewhere, there is a visual board that lists your vision, your purpose, your strategic pillars, all the KPIs and the goals, and it has a spot on that board for what the current performance is relative to what the strategy says it should be. right? And then you conduct regular performance report outs. What I really encourage organizations to do is this is done on a weekly basis, and it's done on the same day at the same time every single week, and you get into sort of this rhythm or this cadence of where it happens over and over again at the same time, same place, same people, same time, right? So, maybe it's on Tuesdays at 1 o'clock in the main boardroom. We're going to have a strategy performance report out. I also encourage these meetings not to be any more than 10 to 15 minutes in length. Now, we don't want this to be some long, drawn-out marathon meeting. We want it to be quick and to the point. And it's the leader's responsibility, it's the manager's responsibility to sit in those meetings and take notes. So, it's not about pointing fingers in this meeting. It's not about developing solutions if maybe performance is not where it's supposed to be. The manager needs to take a note of where performance is relative to where it should be. And if someone is overperforming, it's a matter of outside of that meeting, sitting down with that employee and saying, hey, fantastic job, keep up the good work, let me know what you need to keep this going. On the flip side of that, if people aren't performing and they're not achieving the goals that were set, this is another part of accountability as well. It's not singling that person out, not asking for solutions in the meeting, because that turns these meetings into these marathon meetings that go around in circles. But taking a note and sitting down with that employee afterwards and saying, what happened here? Where did sort of things fall off the rails? What support do you need? What challenges are you coming across? Do I need to remove any barriers that are preventing you from achieving your goals? Do you need further training? What can I do to support you in achieving the goal? And if you're doing this on a regular basis, what happens is that you create a culture of accountability, you create a culture of engagement, and you don't end up sitting down in a board meeting at the end of the year going, oh, we never achieved our goals, we never achieved our strategy, because by then it's way too late. If you're not managing the strategy execution on a regular basis, on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, if you sit down, on a quarterly basis or, at the end of the year, it's too late. The horse is already out of the gate. There's nothing you can do about it at that point. So, want to make sure that you're doing these regular performance report outs, sitting down with employees after, engaging them to make sure they continue to be successful, or you make the changes that you need to make those employees who are not performing successful so that they can achieve their performance requirements. And then, of course, you want to celebrate those successes. So, maybe on a quarterly basis or on a monthly basis, if you've achieved the goals that you've set out, you'll have some sort of way of celebrating the successes of achieving those goals. So, again, no scientific formula for this. It's just a matter of sitting down and doing it. And, some folks may be saying, well, that sounds kind of simple and basic. But again, the organizations that are successful in strategy execution are the ones that get this basic stuff down pat, and they do it on a regular basis. That's where there's a big difference between the good companies and the great companies is they don't do this once, they don't do it twice, they do it over and over and over and over and over again. And over time, it becomes, becomes easier and easier. For managers, for leaders who are not familiar with doing this, it's sort of, the Mr. Miyagi Karate Kid wax on, wax off thing. Once you do it so many times, it gets built into muscle memory, and it becomes sort of a natural thing that you do. It becomes easier and easier to do it over time, but it involves sticking with it and being disciplined and doing it over and over and over again. So the final piece I'm going to talk about here is, in terms of strategy execution, is building the right team. So we need to make sure that we have the right people in the right spots on the bus in order to execute this strategy. Because you could have all of this stuff set up, great communication. You're managing strategy execution on a regular basis. You have all the elements and sort of critical components of strategy execution in place. But if you don't have the right people, it could be a little bit like pushing string up the hill, right? So, very quickly, organizations will start to see, once they have all the structure and this framework in place, and they start managing the strategy execution, you're very quickly going to see which individuals are going to perform and which aren't. And, you have to make sure there are clear roles and responsibilities that are set, so on and so forth. Be very slow to hire the right people and quick to fire. That's sort of a motto of the tech companies down in Silicon Valley right now is, slow to hire, quick to fire. Because if you don't have the right people, your competition is going to outpace you so fast to make your head spin, right? So, making sure that you get the right people on board and then keeping the right people, on board once they are part of your team. And if they're not performing, it's a matter of, strategically removing them. And we don't want to condone mediocre performance. If an individual is not performing, we either need to correct that very quickly or we need to get rid of them. And I know in a job market like Alberta, this can be very challenging and maybe a little bit much to digest. But if you don't do this, you end up creating this disease within your culture, within the organization, where mediocrity is tolerated and accepted. And over the long term, the long-term benefits of letting this happen are going to be, not where you want them to be. So you suffer a little bit of short-term pain for long-term gain there. But you need to make sure that you have the right team with the right people in the right spots on the bus. And that doesn't mean just because you have to get rid of someone or someone's not fitting in with the team that they're a bad person or anything like that. It's nothing personal. It's just, they're not a right fit for the organization, and you have to make sure that you do the best thing for the organization. Now, having said that, maybe it's not the completely the individual's fault. Maybe they don't have the right resources, the skills, or the knowledge that they need to perform. And as an employer, as a manager, as a leader, you need to make sure you understand what those skills and knowledge gaps are, and that you close those gaps and continually develop and foster the growth of your team. So you start with a good base, a good solid foundation of great people, and then you develop and you foster them. And man, when this starts to come together, as long as you're doing all the other pieces, that's when the magic really starts to happen. So, now once we have moved and started doing all these things, we're going to start to realize some improvements. That's what the strategic plan is all about, is improving performance of the organization. And we need to make sure that we lock in those gains, right? So we don't want to sort of do a two-step forward, one-step back type thing here. We want to make sure that we lock in those gains. So, if we had a goal to improve quality by X percentage, let's say, and we've changed things and we've achieved that goal, we need to make sure that we don't slide back and go back to how things were being performed in the past, and then just move on to setting another goal. Because if we can't lock those improvements in, then we're never really going to make, gain any good ground here. So, we need to lock those gains in. How do we do that? It's actually quite straightforward and simple. Once we've identified a better way to do things, so maybe a better way to ensure we have the quality that we're looking for, maybe a better way to minimize the amount of energy that we're using, or to minimize the amount of waste that's being generated, we need to embed those improvements into the existing systems, processes, and procedures. So, as food organizations, we all have a set of GMPs. We all have a set of standard operating procedures of how we do things, of how that organization does things, right? So as we improve how we do things, we need to make sure we capture those in our GMPs and our SOPs, so that becomes the new way that we do things around here. And then once we have captured those into our systems, our processes, and procedures, we then need to be disciplined to make sure that we're following those systems, those processes, and those procedures. That they're not just a binder on a shelf somewhere that's gathering dust, but that we're actually following them to a T and be disciplined to them, right? Because if we're not, and something goes awry or something goes haywire, and we weren't following a process, we don't know what caused that defect to happen or that quality issue to happen. But if we were following, to a T what we said we were supposed to be doing, we can figure out where things went wrong, we can make an adjustment, and we can correct that problem. And of course, it always helps to audit compliance to these systems. So I always encourage organizations, especially in the food sector, if you can build these into your food safety systems, if you can build these into your existing processes and procedures, and have them audited, either internally or by third-party auditors, it'll make sure that what you say you're doing is the right thing to be doing in the first place, and that you're doing what you say you should be doing, right? So, not only do we need to make sure that we have a good strategy in place, that we're executing it properly, but that when we do realize the performance levels from executing our strategy, that we're locking these gains in place so that we don't slide backwards. With that, I just wanted to share a couple of supporting tools and resources with you folks on, how you can help, some tools to help with your strategy, not only development, but certainly execution. There is an action plan template, and these resources will be sent out to folks who have registered and viewed these webinars. So this is a resource that will be supplied to you at no cost. It was developed over a period of 5 years with some leading organizations in the food processing sector of Alberta, and this is just a screenshot of an Excel spreadsheet, relatively simple and straightforward, but very powerful, and it works very well. As you can see along the bottom there's a bunch of tabs. So, what this is an action plan for every single initiative or program that you're going to put in place in order to achieve the goals that you've set, in order to improve the KPIs that will measure performance in the strategic pillars, that will lead you towards achieving your vision and fulfilling your purpose. And the great thing about this is we've taken the high-level concept of where the organization wants to be when it grows up and why it wants to do that, the purpose and the vision, and it's now culminating in a bunch of simple, straightforward action items, but you need to make sure that these action items are managed properly as well. So this is an action plan template that says these are the things that we need to do in order to implement this initiative or this program in order to achieve the goal that we've set out for one of these pillars. So every one of these action item templates aligns to a specific initiative that aligns back up to a specific pillar and a specific KPI. To give you a little bit closer look, it's just a straightforward spreadsheet that allows you to visually manage each project, each initiative, each program. And what you really want to do here is you want to get each employee who's responsible for achieving that goal to fill out the activities that they need to perform in order to get a program or initiative completed or implemented. It shows the status of each item, when it's due. So it's got all the critical components to an effective action plan in there. So that'll be made available to folks as well. Another tool resource that will be made available to folks is what's called a strategic roadmap. So, if you look, basically the way that this is set up, if you look on the left-hand side here, is each one of the strategic pillars. This is just a generic example for this organization of strategic pillars being people, partners, operational excellence, product, and community. And what are the key initiatives or programs under every single one of these pillars? So, for example, here under people, a key initiative could be engagement, of which there would be an associated action plan for that. But when is it due? And what we've really found is that executives love this simple but powerful tool because it gives them a snapshot of all the initiatives that are happening under their strategic plan and the due dates, right? So many times, what executives will do, what the senior leaders will do is they will print out this strategic roadmap, put it on their wall, or have it, visually available somehow so that they can see exactly when, each of these strategic initiatives is due, and it allows for, planning and checkups and so on and so forth. Again, very simple, basic tool, but very, very powerful. The final tool that I'm going to show you here is a strategic KPI dashboard. And again, executives are all over this. They love this because what it does is it shows the health of your organization in one snapshot, one page. This is almost like looking at the dashboard of your car. You know exactly what's going on, how fast you're going, how much gas you have, where you need to pay attention, do you need an oil change, where do you need to focus your attention, right? So from a higher level senior manager perspective, this gives you a great snapshot of how your organization is performing and the areas that you need to focus on, that folks need to focus on in order to make sure the strategic plan keeps going forward. Again, made with some very simple tools and done that way on purpose so that they're very dynamic, can be used by a number of individuals. You don't need any special software or anything for that. It's quite easy to set up. So again, this strategic dashboard is something that will be provided to all folks who registered and view these webinars, and it'll be set up and ready for you to go. So with that, we're getting towards the end of our time here. Were there any questions that we had at this point?
Hi, Brett. Yes, I have a few questions for you.
Sure.
So first off, can you talk a little bit about the main reasons why strategy execution fails?
Yeah, sure. So definitely a good question. I tend to get this question quite a bit. And, what I really found is sort of two key components there. So either the strategy was not developed correctly in the first place, so there's not clear longer-term vision set out, there's not clear KPIs and goals set up and in place. So that's usually the first major reason, is that the strategy itself was not developed properly. And then the second major reason is essentially comes down to leadership, is that the leaders are not executing the strategy, they're not disciplined, they're not sticking with it, they're not doing what they need to do to make sure and see this execution through. So that'd be the two main reasons why strategy execution would fail.
Okay, and do the components you talked about for the strategy execution apply to all types and sizes of companies?
Yeah, good question again. For every organization, they will have a unique and customized strategic plan, obviously, and the model that we presented allows for that uniqueness and customization within, within an individual organization. But when it comes down to strategy execution, what we've really found is that by studying the great organizations across the globe, is that there are similar elements, similar characteristics of organizations that are successful when it comes to strategy execution, regardless of what their strategy looks like, what industry they're in, how big of an organization or how small of an organization they are. The elements that we are talking about here are applicable across all different types and sizes of businesses and organizations, for sure. Absolutely.
Okay, great. Well, that is all the time we have for today's webinar. So,
sorry, Matt. We had a couple of just wrap-up slides here. If you could give me a couple more minutes, sure. So, just to sort of wrap this up, I know everyone's time is valuable. Wanted to just sort of feedback to you, a few takeaways. I know it's been over a period, a couple of months that we've done this webinar series. So, just for folks, just to sort of summarize things, in terms of the first webinar, the key takeaway there is really that, sustainability isn't some sort of lefty tree hugger movement that's nice to do when you have extra time on your hands. Sustainability is a better way to make a bigger profit. And in order to be successful in today's fiercely competitive marketplace, especially in the food sector, sustainability is a critical component to success and a better way to make a bigger profit. From the second, webinar, the key takeaway there that I hope folks got is that, being successful, as I said, in today's fiercely competitive marketplace requires a strategy that includes sustainability. If your competitors are using less energy, using less water, generating less waste, they're spending less money. If they are able to retain and attract the top talent, and you're not, they're going to have better people. They're going to have a better team within their organization. So in order to be successful today, organizations require a strategy that includes sustainability, and we certainly saw how the model presented throughout this webinar series certainly enables that to happen. And for this final webinar, again, just to reiterate that strategy gets you into the game for sure, but execution is the game. Organizations can develop the greatest strategies in the world, but if they can execute them, by following sort of incorporating the elements that we talked about today into their execution plan, then maybe a lot of that strategy development work is, not going to deliver the results that are expected. So, strategy, as it says here on the slide, really gets you into the game, but execution is the game. Organizations that are successful, the great organizations, are differentiated from the good organizations through strategy execution. With that, a few things to think about in terms of possible next steps. Some questions that I would be asking myself is sustainability important to the future success of the business? And I would say in today's day and age, absolutely, that's critical. And if sustainability is important to you, future success, do you have a strategic plan that includes sustainability? Because if you don't, chances are you're leaving a lot on the table and you're not optimizing the performance of your organization. And, are you successful? If you have all those things in place, are you successful in executing your strategy? Because if you're not, then chances are you're not optimizing performance from that perspective as well. So, from that, if there is some work that needs to be done in your strategic plan, whether you have one in place, and you just need to refresh it, maybe to integrate sustainability, or you need some, support in executing it, or you need to develop one from scratch. Can you do it on your own? Can you do it internally, or do you need external support? What we have found is that with Alberta Agriculture and Forestry, we've done a pilot program. We've brought 11 companies through a coaching program to develop and execute strategic plan. And I tell you, the results have been phenomenal. The feedback from the executives and the management teams have been phenomenal. So, many times it's just going through the process once and building that internal capacity to be able to carry it on forward. And then we've been very successful in doing that through this pilot program. So, if you feel that maybe might be a little bit much to go and do this on your own, I would really encourage you to contact your industry development officer to explore opportunities to access some grant funding that would be there to support external consultant coaching. So that is available. I encourage you to do that. You also feel free to reach out to myself at any point. And, at this, I know we're coming right up to 11 o'clock mark here. I'd like just to a couple of things to wrap up here. These slide decks will be forwarded to all the folks who registered and viewed these webinar series, along with the tools that were shown today. I'd also like to mention that a feedback survey is going to be going out to folks who have registered and viewed these webinars, and certainly appreciate feedback on that. If you could take a few minutes to fill out that survey and get it back within about a week's time, that'd be greatly appreciated. And would really like to, thank Growing Forward 2 for supporting this program, enabling the development and delivery of this webinar series. It takes a lot to put something like this together, and the taped webinars will be available on the Alberta Agriculture and Forestry website, and you can locate them there. So, thanks to yourself, Matt, for being the moderator and making sure everything works out technically here, and to the Growing Forward folks and Alberta Agriculture and Forestry team for setting this all up. And hopefully the folks who attended got some value out of this.
Great, thank you. That wraps up the Sustainable Strategy Development webinar series. I'd like to thank Brett for taking the time to share with us over these 3 webinars. And as he said, they have all been recorded for future viewing. That wraps up today's webinar. Have a great day.